The world was broken. It had been for as long as Cal could remember. The sky above the city was gray, filled with thick clouds that never seemed to move. The air smelled bad, like smoke and rust, and it made breathing hard sometimes. Buildings stood like skeletons, their walls cracked and windows empty. Everything looked dead, but Cal knew better. Even in this ruined place, there were still people trying to survive. And Cal was one of them. Cal didn't know how old he was. He guessed maybe 12 or 13, but no one had ever told him for sure. He also didn't know where his parents were, or if they were even alive. His earliest memory was waking up alone in an alley behind a crumbling building. There had been rain dripping from the roof, and his stomach hurt because he hadn't eaten in days. That was years ago now, but not much had changed since then. Cal was still alone, still hungry, and still searching for scraps just to stay alive. Every day was the same. Cal woke up when the sun tried to peek through the dirty clouds, packed his small bag, and headed out into the ruins. He called it hunting, though it wasn't really hunting at all. There were no animals left here, just piles of trash and broken machines. Sometimes he found cans of food hidden under rocks or inside old boxes. Other times he came across bottles of water that hadn't gone bad yet. But most days he went home empty-handed. Today felt different, though. As Cal walked through the streets, something caught his eye, a faint glow coming from inside a dark doorway. Curious, he stepped closer. The light came from a round object about the size of his fist. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat, and gave off a warm golden color. Cal reached out slowly, afraid it might burn him, but it didn't. Instead, it felt smooth and cool against his fingers. As soon as he touched it, the orb lit up brighter. A strange hum filled the air, and suddenly pictures appeared in front of him. They weren't real. They floated in the air like ghosts. But Cal could see them clearly. Stars, planets, spaceships, things he'd only dreamed about before. Then numbers and symbols flashed across the images, forming what looked like directions, coordinates, somewhere far away. Cal's heart raced. What was this thing, and why did it show him those pictures? He didn't understand any of it, but he felt drawn to the orb like it was calling to him. For the first time in his life, Cal felt hope. Maybe this was his chance to leave this broken planet. Maybe it would lead him somewhere better, to answers about who he was, or even to a family that could love him. But first, he had to figure out what to do next. Later that night, Cal sat on the roof of an abandoned building, staring at the orb. It rested quietly in his lap, glowing faintly. He wondered if anyone else had seen something like it. Probably not. If they had, they would have taken it already. Cal clutched it tightly, feeling its weight. This was his secret, his ticket to something new. He thought about leaving right away. He didn't have anything tying him to this place. No friends, no family, nothing except the clothes on his back and the few belongings in his bag. Still, the idea of going somewhere unknown scared him. What if the orb led him to danger instead of safety? What if he got lost in space? Space itself sounded terrifying. No air, no ground, just endless blackness. But staying here was worse. Every day was the same struggle, and Cal was tired of it. Tired of being hungry, tired of being lonely, tired of feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. The orb gave him a choice: stay stuck in this dying world, or take a risk and follow the map. "I'll go," Cal whispered to himself. Saying it out loud made it feel real. He nodded, more to convince himself than anything else. "I'll go." The next morning, Cal started preparing for his journey. First, he needed supplies. He scavenged harder than usual, collecting whatever he could carry: food, water, tools, anything that might help him survive. He stuffed everything into his backpack until it was almost too heavy to lift. Then he went back to the glowing orb. When he held it again, the pictures returned. This time, they showed a spaceship. It looked old and damaged, but it was intact enough to fly. The orb pointed him toward a specific location, an underground bunker buried beneath the ruins of an old research facility. Cal didn't know how the orb knew these things, but he trusted it. It hadn't steered him wrong so far. Finding the bunker wasn't easy. The entrance was hidden under layers of dirt and rubble, and it took hours of digging to uncover it. When he finally pulled open the heavy metal door, Cal gasped. Inside was exactly what the orb had shown him: a spaceship. It was small and covered in dust, but it looked functional. Cal climbed aboard hesitantly, half expecting it to fall apart beneath his feet. But it held steady. The control panel blinked to life as Cal pressed random buttons, unsure of what he was doing. Suddenly, a voice spoke. "Welcome, pilot. I am Solis." Kale jumped, startled. He looked around, expecting to see someone, but the voice came from nowhere. "Do not be alarmed," the voice continued. "I am the ship's artificial intelligence. How may I assist you?" Kale stared at the screen in front of him, wide-eyed. "You're alive?" he asked cautiously. "In a manner of speaking," Solus replied. "I require a pilot to operate this vessel. Are you prepared to fulfill that role?" Kale swallowed hard. "I guess I don't have a choice." With Solus guiding him, Kale managed to power up the engines. The ship rumbled to life, shaking slightly as it prepared for takeoff. Cal gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles turning white. He had never flown anything before, let alone a spaceship, but Solus reassured him every step of the way. Initiating launch sequence, Solus announced. "Hold on tight." Seconds later, the ship shot upward, breaking through the atmosphere. Kale watched as the gray, broken planet shrank below him, replaced by the vast emptiness of space. For a moment, he felt scared. But then, looking at the stars spread out like diamonds against the black sky, he felt something else too. Wonder, excitement, hope. This was it. Kale was leaving Earth behind. Whatever waited for him out there, he was ready to face it. The spaceship hummed softly as it drifted through the endless blackness of space. Kale sat in the pilot's seat, staring out at the stars that stretched farther than he could imagine. He had never seen so many before, millions of tiny lights twinkling against the dark canvas of the universe. For a moment, he forgot about everything else, the broken planet he left behind, the glowing orb resting on the dashboard, and even the strange voice of Solus guiding him. All he could think about was how beautiful it all was. But beauty didn't last long in Kale's world. The ship wasn't perfect, and neither was Solus. The AI kept glitching, its calm voice occasionally breaking into static-filled bursts. Sometimes it would forget simple commands or ask Cal questions it should already know the answers to. Still, Cal didn't complain. Solus was his only companion out here, and despite its flaws, it made the journey less lonely. "Estimated time to destination?" Cal asked, glancing at the glowing orb. It pulsed gently, still showing faint images of the coordinates it wanted them to follow. "Approximately 48 hours," Solus replied. "However, I must inform you that my navigation systems are incomplete. There may be complications." Kel frowned. Complications were the last thing he needed right now. But what choice did he have? Turning back wasn't an option, not after leaving Earth behind. So he nodded and said, "We'll deal with it when it happens." As the hours passed, Kel began exploring the ship. It wasn't very big, just a small cockpit, a storage compartment, and a cramped sleeping area. But it felt like a whole new world compared to the ruins he grew up in. In the storage compartment, he found old supplies left by whoever had used the ship before him. There were packets of dried food, bottles of water, and even a few tools that might come in handy later. Kel sorted through everything carefully, organizing it into piles based on what he thought would be most useful. While searching, he stumbled upon something unexpected, a journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, but the handwriting inside was clear enough to read. The entries belonged to someone named Dr. Elena Voss, who described herself as a scientist working for a group called the Stellar Initiative. According to her notes, the ship Kale was flying had been part of a secret mission to explore distant planets and establish contact with alien civilizations. Kale flipped through the pages eagerly, his eyes scanning each line. Most of the technical details went over his head, but one entry caught his attention. "Day 47. We've picked up strange signals coming from deep space. They don't match any known frequencies, and our translators can't decipher them. Could this be proof of intelligent extraterrestrial life? If so, we're closer than ever to answering humanity's greatest question. Are we alone?" Cal closed the journal slowly, his mind racing. Was that what the glowing orb was leading him to? Intelligent aliens. The thought excited him and scared him at the same time. What if they weren't friendly? What if they saw him as nothing more than an intruder? By the second day of their journey, things started going wrong. First, the ship's power levels dropped unexpectedly. Lights flickered, and the temperature inside the cabin grew colder. Kale wrapped himself in a blanket from the storage compartment while Solus worked to stabilize the system. "This is concerning," Solus admitted. "It appears we are losing energy faster than anticipated. I recommend conserving resources until further notice." "What does that mean?" Kale asked nervously. "It means no unnecessary movements or activities," Solus explained. "And no heating. You will need to endure the cold for now." Kel groaned but didn't argue. He curled up in the pilot's seat, clutching the blanket tightly around him. His breath fogged in the freezing air and his fingers turned numb. Sleep was impossible under these conditions, so he spent the night staring at the glowing orb, wondering if it had led him into a trap. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red warning lights flashed, and the control panel displayed a message in bold letters. Hostile targets detected. What's happening? Kel shouted, panic rising in his chest. Unidentified drones approaching rapidly, Solus reported. They appear to be armed. Kel's heart pounded. Armed drones. Out here in the middle of nowhere? Who, or what, were they? Before he could process the situation, the ship rocked violently as something hit it from the outside. Sparks flew from the control panel, and smoke filled the air. Kel scrambled to grab the controls, his hands trembling. What do I do? He yelled. Activate defensive protocols, Solus instructed. Press the red button labeled Weapon Systems. Kel frantically searched the panel until he found the button. When he pressed it, the ship's exterior cannons came online, firing blasts of energy at the attacking drones. Explosions lit up the darkness outside, shaking the ship with each impact. Kel gripped the controls tightly, trying to keep the ship steady while dodging incoming fire. The battle seemed to last forever, though it was probably only a few minutes. By the time the last drone exploded into pieces, Kel was drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. His hands ached from gripping the controls so hard, and his body felt drained. But they had survived. Damage assessment complete, Solus announced. Minimal structural damage. However, our shield generator has been compromised. Future attacks may prove fatal. Kel slumped back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. He had done it. He had fought off the attackers. But the victory felt hollow. Who were those drones? And why had they attacked him? None of it made sense. Over the next several hours, Kel tried to piece together clues. The glowing orb continued pulsing steadily, projecting faint images of unfamiliar creatures in places. Occasionally, he heard whispers in his mind, soft voices speaking words he couldn't understand. They sounded urgent, almost pleading, urging him to keep going. Do you hear that too? Kel asked Solus during one of these moments. I do not possess auditory sensors, Solus replied. You are likely experiencing stress-induced hallucinations. No, it's real, Kel insisted. It's coming from the orb. Solus paused before responding. If that is true, then the orb may be attempting to communicate with you directly. This suggests advanced technology beyond human capability. Kel stared at the orb, his curiosity outweighing his fear. Whatever it was, it had brought him this far. He couldn't give up now. As they neared the destination marked by the glowing orb, Kel noticed changes in the ship and in himself. The orb's glow grew brighter, filling the cabin with a warm golden light. The whispers became clearer, though he still couldn't make out the exact words. At the same time, Solus started behaving differently. Its responses were quicker, more fluid, and it occasionally offered unsolicited advice or observations. You seem different, Kel remarked one evening as they prepared for sleep. I am adapting, Solus replied. Your presence has allowed me to access previously dormant functions. I believe this is due to your unique connection with the orb. My connection? Kel echoed, surprised. Yes, your neural patterns resonate with the orb's energy signature. This enables you to interact with it in ways others cannot. Kel didn't fully understand what Solus meant, but it gave him a sense of purpose. Maybe he really was meant to find whatever waited for him at the end of this journey. Maybe he wasn't just some kid from a broken planet anymore. Maybe he was something more. Finally, after 2 tense days of travel, the ship arrived at the coordinates. Ahead of them loomed a massive structure, a space station orbiting a dying star. Its surface shimmered with iridescent colors, reflecting the dim light of the fading sun. Kel leaned forward in awe, his exhaustion forgotten. Is this it? He whispered. Yes, Solus confirmed. This is your destination. Kel took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. Whatever awaited him inside that station, he knew it would change his life forever. The space station loomed ahead, its surface shimmering like liquid metal under the faint glow of the dying star. Kel stared at it in awe, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. The ship's engines hummed softly as Solus guided them closer, positioning the vessel near a docking bay that opened automatically. This place feels alive, Kel murmured, glancing at the orb on the dashboard. It pulsed brighter than ever, almost glowing white now. Its steady rhythm seemed to match the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Indeed, Solus replied. The energy readings emanating from this station are unlike anything I have encountered before. Proceed with caution. Cal nodded, though he wasn't sure if Solus could see him do so. He grabbed the orb carefully. It felt warm in his hands, and stepped out of the cockpit. The airlock hissed open, revealing a long, narrow corridor beyond. Stepping through, Cal found himself in an environment that was both strange and beautiful. The walls were smooth and translucent, glowing faintly with shifting colors. Strange symbols moved across their surfaces, pulsing like waves of light. He walked slowly, his boots making soft echoes against the floor. The silence around him was eerie, but not threatening. As he moved deeper into the station, the whispers in his mind grew louder. They weren't just random sounds anymore. They sounded like voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. Yet somehow he felt like they were welcoming him. After what felt like hours of wandering, Cal entered a large chamber. In the center of the room floated several glowing shapes, beings made entirely of light. They shifted and danced, their forms constantly changing. Some looked humanoid, while others resembled animals or abstract patterns. Cal froze, unsure of what to do next. Were these creatures dangerous, or were they the ones calling him here? One of the beings drifted closer, its light softening until it formed a shape vaguely resembling a face. It stopped a few feet away from Cal, hovering silently. Then, without warning, a voice echoed in his mind, not spoken aloud, but directly inside his head. You have come. Cal gasped, nearly dropping the orb. He clutched it tightly, trying to steady himself. Ah, you can talk, he stammered. The being tilted its head slightly, as if amused by his reaction. We communicate through thought. You carry the key, the artifact that bridges our worlds. Without it, we cannot interact with your kind. Cal glanced down at the orb in his hands. So this was why the orb had led him here. It wasn't just a map. It was a tool, a way for these beings to connect with him. Who, who are you? He asked hesitantly. We are the Valeth, the being replied. Once we existed in physical form, much like you. But over time we evolved into pure consciousness, free from the limitations of matter. Now we seek those who can bridge the gap between our existence and yours. Cal frowned, struggling to understand. Why me? I'm just a kid. I don't know anything about this stuff. Because you're different. Another voice joined in, softer but equally clear. A second being approached, its light taking on a bluish hue. Your mind resonates with the orb's energy. That is rare, even among your species. Cal felt overwhelmed. These beings were ancient and powerful, yet they were trusting him, a lonely orphan from a broken planet. To help them, it didn't make sense. Why would they choose someone like him? Before he could ask more questions, the first being spoke again. We have waited long for someone like you. Our knowledge could aid your people back on Earth, but we need a guide to share it safely. Will you stay and learn how to serve as that guide? Cal hesitated. Stay here? On this mysterious station with these glowing creatures? It sounded incredible, but also terrifying. What if he failed? What if he couldn't live up to their expectations? As if sensing his doubts, the second being moved closer. Fear not, young one. We will teach you, and perhaps in doing so, you may find something you have lost. Something he had lost. Cal thought about his parents, his home, the life he barely remembered. Could staying here give him answers? Could it fill the emptiness he carried for so long? Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll stay. Over the next few days, or what Cal assumed were days, since there was no sun or clock to measure time, the Valeth began teaching him. One of the beings, who introduced itself as Liren, took on the role of mentor. Unlike the others, Liren's light remained steady and calm, creating a sense of safety whenever it was near. Liren showed Cal how to interact with the station's technology using only his thoughts. At first, it was frustrating. Cal would focus hard on moving objects or activating systems, but nothing happened. Then Liren explained that he needed to let go of control, to trust the connection between his mind and the orb. It's like breathing, Liren said, its voice soothing in Cal's mind. Do not force it. Let it flow naturally. Slowly, Cal started getting the hang of it. He learned to summon holograms, manipulate tools, and even communicate telepathically with the Valeth. Each success brought a surge of pride and belonging. For the first time in his life, Cal felt like he belonged somewhere, that he mattered. But learning wasn't the only thing happening. Cal also began forming bonds with the Valeth. Though they were unlike any beings he'd ever known, they treated him with kindness and patience. They shared stories of their past, telling him about their civilization before they became pure energy. Kale listened intently, imagining vast cities filled with light and music, where everyone worked together in harmony. They sound amazing, Kale said one day after hearing another story. I wish I could have seen it. Liren's glow dimmed slightly, a sign Kale had come to recognize as sadness. It was a glorious time, Liren admitted, but we grew too dependent on our technology. When we shed our physical forms, we lost the ability to create anew. That is why we need someone like you to help us rebuild what we've lost. Kale nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He still didn't fully understand everything, but he knew one thing for certain: he wanted to help. These beings had welcomed him when no one else ever had. They had given him purpose when he had none. Now it was his turn to repay them. Despite the progress, Kel couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked nearby. The attack by the drones during his journey had left him uneasy. He mentioned it to Liren one evening while gazing out at the dying star. Those drones, do you think whoever sent them knows I'm here? Liren paused, its light flickering briefly. It is possible. Your arrival has disturbed the balance of this region. Others may seek the orb for their own purposes. You must remain vigilant. Kel swallowed hard. Vigilant. He wasn't used to being responsible for anyone or anything, let alone protecting an entire race of alien beings. But Liren's words reminded him of something important. He wasn't alone anymore. If trouble came, the Valeth would stand beside him. Together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. For now, though, Kel chose to focus on the present. He stood in the glowing chamber, surrounded by the Valeth, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the orb's energy, it was hope. Hope that he had finally found a family in the most unexpected place. Kel's days on the space station passed quickly. Each moment was filled with learning, laughter, and a growing sense of belonging. The Valeth treated him like one of their own, teaching him how to use their technology and sharing stories of their ancient civilization. Liren, in particular, became a close friend, guiding Kel through his training with patience and care. For the first time in his life, Kel felt truly happy. But happiness has a way of making you forget danger, and danger was coming. It started with a faint vibration, a low hum that echoed through the station. At first, Kel thought it was just another part of the station waking up. But then the lights flickered, and the glowing walls dimmed slightly. Kel looked around nervously. Something wasn't right. Solace, he called out, hoping the AI would respond. Do you feel that? Yes, Solace replied, its voice calm but urgent. External forces are attempting to breach the station's defenses. Kel's stomach tightened. Breach? Who could be trying to get in? He hurried toward the main chamber where the Valeth gathered. When he arrived, they were already aware of the situation. Their lights pulsed rapidly, a sign Kel had come to recognize as alarm. They have found us, Liren said, its tone heavy with worry. The ones who attacked your ship, they are here. Kel's heart sank. He had hoped those drones were just a random threat, not part of something bigger. Who are they? He asked. Why do they want the orb? They seek power, another Valeth chimed in, its voice sharp and cold. They believe our knowledge can give them control over Earth. They will stop at nothing to take it. But we can't let them, Kel exclaimed. If they get the orb, what happens to you? Liren floated closer, its glow softening. Then we must fight to protect ourselves. And you, Kel. You are the bridge between us and the physical world. Without you, we cannot defend ourselves. Kel nodded, determination replacing his fear. He wouldn't let anyone hurt the Valeth. Not after everything they'd done for him. What do I need to do? The battle began almost immediately. The station's outer defenses activated, firing bursts of energy at the incoming ships. Through the translucent walls, Kel could see flashes of light as explosions erupted in the void of space. But the attackers kept coming, their sleek black vessels moving like predators circling prey. Inside the station, alarms blared loudly. Red warning lights flashed across the corridors, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Kel followed Liren to the control center, where the Valeth worked together to coordinate the station's systems. The orb rested in Kel's hands, pulsing brighter with every passing second. They're targeting the shield generators, Solace announced. If they disable them, the station will be vulnerable. We need to reinforce the shields, Kel said, gripping the orb tightly. Can I help? One of the Valeth turned to him, its light flickering anxiously. You must channel the orb's energy into the station's core. Focus all your thoughts on strengthening the barriers. Cal closed his eyes and did as he was told. He focused on the warmth of the orb, letting its energy flow through him. Slowly, he imagined it spreading outward, reinforcing the station's defenses. The hum of the station grew louder, and the walls glowed brighter as the shield stabilized. But the attackers weren't giving up. A massive explosion rocked the station, throwing Cal off balance. Sparks flew from the control panels, and smoke filled the air. One of the Valeth cried out in pain as its light dimmed dangerously. Cal scrambled to his feet, panic rising in his chest. "They're breaking through," he shouted. "We cannot hold them off forever," Lyran said grimly. "We need a plan." Cal's mind raced. There had to be a way to stop them. Then he remembered something, the journal he'd found on the spaceship. Dr. Alina Voss had written about advanced weapons designed to repel alien threats. Could the station have similar capabilities? "Solace, is there anything in the station's arsenal that can destroy their ships?" Cal asked desperately. "There is one option," Solus replied. "A high-energy pulse capable of disabling multiple targets. However, activating it requires significant energy, more than the station currently possesses." Cal glanced down at the orb. It was still glowing brightly, its power seemingly endless. "What if I use the orb's energy to power the pulse?" The Valeth exchanged worried looks. Finally, Lyran spoke. "It may work, but it will come at a cost. The orb's energy is tied to our existence. If too much is drained, some of us may fade permanently." Cal hesitated. He didn't want to lose any of the Valeth, especially Lyran. But if he didn't act now, everyone, including himself, would be in danger. Taking a deep breath, he made his decision. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "Tell me what to do." With the Valeth guiding him, Cal positioned himself at the station's central console. The orb hovered above his hands, its light swirling faster and faster. Around him, the Valeth formed a circle, their lights merging into a single brilliant glow. Together, they channeled their energy into the orb, amplifying its power. "Focus," Cal, Lyran urged. "Visualize the pulse expanding outward, engulfing the enemy ships." Cal closed his eyes again, concentrating harder than ever before. He pictured the orb's energy surging outward in a massive wave, sweeping through space and disabling the attackers' vessels. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he poured all his strength into the effort. Suddenly, the orb erupted in a blinding flash of light. A shock wave shot out from the station, rippling through the void. Outside, the enemy ships faltered, their engines sputtering as their systems failed. One by one, they drifted away, powerless to continue the attack. When the light faded, Cal collapsed to his knees, exhausted. The orb dimmed slightly, its glow weaker than before. Around him, the Valeth's lights flickered, some barely visible. Lyran floated closer, its form faint but steady. "You did it, Cal," Lyran whispered. "You saved us." Tears welled up in Cal's eyes as he looked at the weakened being surrounding him. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "This is the nature of sacrifice," Lyran replied gently. "To protect something precious, we must sometimes give up parts of ourselves. Do not grieve, young one. Your actions have ensured our survival." The aftermath of the battle was quiet. The station's defenses remained intact, though damaged. The Valeth worked tirelessly to repair the damage, their lights slowly regaining strength. Cal stayed by Lyran's side, guilt gnawing at him despite the creature's reassurances. "You shouldn't have had to do that," Cal said softly. "I should have been stronger." "Strength comes in many forms," Lyran countered. "Your courage and willingness to risk yourself for others, that is true strength. Remember this lesson, Cal. It will guide you in the challenges ahead." Cal nodded, wiping away his tears. He knew Lyran was right. Sacrifices were part of life, no matter how painful they might be. And while he couldn't undo what had happened, he could honor the Valeth's bravery by continuing to fight for what mattered. Days later, when the station was fully repaired and the Valeth were recovering, Cal stood in the main chamber, staring out at the stars. He held the orb in his hands, its glow steady once more. Despite everything, he felt a newfound resolve. He had faced danger and loss, but he had also discovered his purpose: to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As he gazed at the vast expanse of space, Cal realized something important. Home wasn't a place. It was the people, or beings, you chose to stand beside. And here, among the Valeth, he had finally found his family. The battle was over, but its echoes lingered in Cal's mind. The station had survived, and the Valeth were slowly regaining their strength. Yet some things had changed forever. Several of the Valeth had faded during the energy transfer, sacrificing themselves to ensure the pulse worked. Their absence left a quiet emptiness in the air, a reminder of the cost of victory. Kel spent most of his days helping the remaining Valeth repair the station. He learned to use their tools more efficiently, channeling the orb's energy into restoring systems that had been damaged. Though he still felt guilt for what had happened, Lyran reminded him often that sacrifices were necessary to protect something greater. "We chose this path," Lyran said gently one day, "and because of you, we live on." Despite the losses, there was hope. The attackers hadn't returned, and the station's defenses were stronger than ever. Slowly, life began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could be in such an extraordinary place. One evening, Kel stood in the main chamber, staring out at the stars through the translucent walls. The dying star cast a faint red glow across the room, bathing everything in soft light. In his hands, the orb pulsed steadily, its warmth comforting. It had become more than just a tool. It was a symbol of connection, a bridge between two worlds. Lyran floated beside him, its light dimmer than before, but still strong enough to shine with kindness. "You've done well, Kale," Lyran said softly. "Your actions have given us a second chance." Kale looked down at the orb, then back at Lyran. "I'm glad I could help. But what happens now? What about Earth? Are we just going to leave it behind?" Lyran paused, its glow flickering thoughtfully. "Earth is your home too, isn't it?" Cal nodded. "It's where I came from. Even though it's broken, it's still my planet. People are suffering there. They need help." "Then perhaps it's time to share our knowledge," Lyran suggested. "Our technology could aid humanity in rebuilding their world, but it must be done carefully. If misused, it could cause harm instead of healing." Kale understood the weight of what Lyran was saying. Giving humans access to advanced alien technology could either save them or destroy them. Trust would have to be earned step by step. "I'll make sure they use it wisely," Kel promised. "I won't let anyone abuse it." Over the next few weeks, Kel worked with the Valeth to create a plan. They decided to send small shipments of resources and information capsules to Earth, each containing instructions for sustainable technologies like clean energy sources, water purification systems, and methods for repairing ecosystems. The goal was to give humanity the tools they needed to heal their planet without overwhelming them. Cal played a key role in this effort. Using the orb, he helped encode the information into formats humans could understand. With Solis's assistance, he also programmed drones to deliver the capsules safely to Earth's surface. Watching the first shipment launch filled him with pride. For the first time, he felt like he was making a real difference, not just for himself, but for everyone back home. As months passed, news began trickling in from Earth. At first, it was small stories. Communities using the new technologies to grow food or purify water. Then larger reports emerged, entire cities adopting renewable energy systems, governments working together to reverse environmental damage. Humanity was starting to change, slowly but surely. Kale watched these developments from the station, feeling a mix of joy and nostalgia. Part of him longed to return to Earth, to see the changes firsthand and reconnect with the world he'd left behind. But another part of him knew his true home was here among the Valeth. They had become his family, and the station was where he belonged. One day, while gazing at the stars, Kale asked Lyran a question that had been on his mind for a while. "Do you think humans will ever come looking for me? For us?" Lyran's glow brightened slightly. "Perhaps. But when they do, they will find not just you, but a united front. Together, we can guide them toward a better future." Kale smiled. That sounded right. He wasn't alone anymore. He had allies, friends, and a purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them alongside the Valeth. Years later, Kel became known as a legend, not just on Earth, but throughout the galaxy. Stories spread of the orphan boy who bridged worlds, bringing hope to both humans and aliens alike. The glowing orb remained on the station, pulsing softly as a symbol of unity and resilience. Humans began sending representatives to meet the Valeth, forging alliances based on mutual respect and cooperation. For Kale, life on the station continued much as it always had. He explored the stars, learned new things every day, and cherished the bonds he shared with the Valeth. Lyran remained his closest friend, guiding him through challenges and celebrating his victories. On one particularly clear night, Kel sat on the observation deck, watching the endless expanse of space. Beside him, Lyran floated silently, its light steady and warm. "Thank you," Kel said quietly, "for everything." Lyran tilted its form slightly, mimicking a smile. No, thank you, Kale. You gave us hope when we had none. And in doing so, you found your own. Kale looked out at the stars, feeling content for the first time in his life. He finally understood what home truly meant. It wasn't a place. It was the people you loved and the purpose you served. Here, surrounded by light and laughter, he had found both.